Hello, my name's David Runciman, and this is Past, Present, Future. In our series about the great political films, which is coming to an end, we have finally reached the 21st century. This is the first film I've talked about that was made this century. It's Paul Thomas Anderson's remarkable There Will Be Blood, with its completely unforgettable central performance by Daniel Day-Lewis as the oil prospector Daniel Plainview. It is a film in which politics is both nowhere and also absolutely everywhere. Let me try and explain. I want to begin with a pretty sweeping statement. I hope you'll forgive me. In all human societies, I think, in all times and all places, there are essentially four kinds of institutions through which power can be exercised. It might be in one or other of these, it might be in some combination of these, but these are the institutions that in different ways dominate how human beings create societies and communities. They are first the family. In some times and places, the family is the dominant institution. Ties of blood and clan and kinship. Kagemusha was partly about the power of family. The second type of institution is religion. The varieties of religious institutions, churches and elite castes of priests, and liturgy and ritual, the insistence, the requirement of ritual, all of the forms of religious power. The third kind of institution is money, all of the different ways in which money is a form of power. Capital, debt, credit, but also labour, wage labour, the power of the people who are the productive force in any economic system, the market, multiple different ways in which money expresses itself as power. And then finally, the state or politics, all of those various institutions through which political power is exercised, what we think of conventionally as political power, through armies and the police and the law courts and the rule of law and legislatures, all of that. I told you it was a sweeping statement. So we've got family, religion, money, and the state or politics. And everywhere, combinations of these institutions are the ways in which human beings organize their affairs. And no individual human being, no matter how charismatic or powerful, can withstand the force of these institutions if these are, in the time and place in which the individual exists, the powerful ones. Or to put it another way, if an individual wants to take on one of these powerful institutions, that person will need one of the other institutions as the vehicle for confrontation. You can take on the power of families through the state. You can take on the power of the state through families. Anyone who's watching the latest installment of Wolf Hall, The Mirror and the Light, will know that that's what that story is. The church can subjugate the state in various times and places. The state can subjugate the church. Money is sometimes more powerful than anything. Nothing can withstand it. Sometimes nothing can withstand the force of the market. In other times and places, people have worked out how to tame the power of money, usually through the institutions of the state, sometimes through the institutions of the church. There have been points in history where the church controlled money, and so on. The book on which the film I'm talking about today, There Will Be Blood, is based, was published in 1926-1927 by the American writer and political activist Upton Sinclair. It's called Oil! It's about prospecting for oil and the money that could be made from oil in early 20th century California. And it is a novel which is about all four of these kinds of social power or institutional power. All of them play a part in Upton Sinclair's story. It's about family. This is the novel, not the film. The family of an oil prospector who has a son, and it is a dynastic story. Dynasty is one of the manifestations of family power, but also another family, a farmer, a landowner, and his two sons. He has the land on which the oil, or under which the oil lies, and the prospector wants that land. Some of the dynamics, the struggle for control, are dynamics between fathers and sons, between brothers. It is a family saga. It is also about religion, specifically the kind of revivalist evangelical religion that was very strong in early 20th century California. It tells the story of a fictional church called the Church of the Third Revelation, through which evangelical preaching was a means for exercising a kind of power, a kind of control over the local community. Oil is also absolutely a story about money and money power. The power of the big oil companies like Standard Oil of the period, the power of the banks, the power of debt and credit, but also the potential power of the workers. Upton Sinclair was a socialist, he was a Marxist, he understood that money power was connected to labour power. And if there was a way in which the workers could reassert their control over their own labour, they could acquire the power that lay in the hands of the capitalists. And then behind that story is the story of politics. Oil is a deeply political book written by a political activist, written by a socialist. And it does evangelize, not for the third revelation, but for socialism. One of the characters, one of the sons of the farmer, the landowner, goes off to Russia, post-revolutionary Russia, initially to fight the Bolsheviks, but he comes back converted to Bolshevism. Another of the sons is an American socialist like Upton Sinclair, who evangelizes for the possibility of a new politics in America in which the workers control their own destiny. So this is a novel about family, religion, money, and political power. And the politics also includes some very specific references. It was published in 2627, just a few years after the most notorious political scandal in American history until Watergate, probably, what was known as the Teapot Dome scandal. And in the way that everything connects and what goes around comes around, that was the scandal that provided the basis for the story of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. So the Teapot Dome scandal involved land leases in Wyoming, but also in Southern California, for bits of property where there was oil to be discovered, and the selling off of these leases cheap and controlled through Washington, through officials in the Warren Harding administration. It was a deeply corrupt story of political power being used to leverage money power. And it was partly exposed in the end by Burton K. Wheeler, who I discussed in the Mr. Smith Goes to Washington episode as the inspiration for Jefferson Smith. And this scandal also features quite heavily in Upton Sinclair's Oil. So he is also partly writing about political corruption, Washington corruption, and the ways in which political power gets abused by the people who have it. This is the book that provides the inspiration for, the basis for Paul Thomas Anderson's film, There Will Be Blood. But there is one big difference between the film and the book. And Paul Thomas Anderson more or less admitted that the book is the launching pad for his film, and he followed the first, I think, 100 pages or 150 pages of the book relatively closely, and then he goes off in a completely different direction. And the way I would summarize the difference between the book and the film is that the film is absolutely about family. It is absolutely about religion. It is absolutely about money, but it has got none of the politics. Not only no Teapot Dome scandal, no Bolshevism, no socialism, no nothing. Upton Sinclair's novel is partly about how these institutions of power need to be grasped by the power of collective action. He is a socialist. He believes in collective action, the power of groups and communities, the power of labor to wrestle back control from institutions that have been dominating the workers. None of that in There Will Be Blood. It is definitely not a socialist film, but it makes no reference to the possibility or idea of political change. It actually, unless I missed it, makes no reference to anything that you could call conventional politics. There are one or two points where Daniel Plainview, which is the name of the oil prospector, the would-be oil tycoon played by Daniel Day-Lewis, he has to sign land leases. He's trying to get land off people, and we occasionally see him sign the contract. So by implication, those contracts are enforceable through law, but we don't see or hear anything about that. It is a film with a completely different kind of sensibility, a completely different kind of understanding of power, and therefore, by extension, a completely different vision of what we might call politics. And if I had to summarize it, I'm speculating here, I don't know what Paul Thomas Anderson's inspiration was, but I'm guessing. If I had to summarize it, I would say what he did was to take a novel written by a Marxist, a socialist, strip out the Marxism and the socialism, and replace it with a different philosophy or a different philosophical inspiration. This film is like what Oil would read like if it had been written under the influence of, the auspices of, Friedrich Nietzsche. It's Nietzsche, not Marx. It's Oil via Nietzsche, not Oil via Marx. Like I say, I don't know that that's exactly how it went in Paul Thomas Anderson's mind, but he does come from a generation of filmmakers who would have been educated in American colleges, liberal arts colleges, in the late 1980s, early 1990s. And education in America, again, this is a sweeping statement, went through a shift from the 60s and 70s to the 80s and 90s, liberal arts education. In the 60s and 70s, of course, you would read all sorts of things. But in some respects, the presiding influence over radical philosophy or ideas of change that you might come across in an American college in the 60s and 70s was Marx. So a filmmaker like Martin Scorsese, who went to college, to liberal arts college, in the 1960s, I think he finished at college in 1968, the year of the student uprisings, you can be pretty sure that Scorsese was exposed to Marxist ideas. Paul Thomas Anderson in the late 80s, the early 90s, I think he did creative writing. I think he studied briefly with David Foster Wallace. I don't know what he studied, but my guess is he is part of that generation who through the 80s and the 90s saw Marx drop off their reading lists to be replaced by Beyond Good and Evil, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, or Nietzsche's masterpiece, The Genealogy of Morality. There Will Be Blood is the closest thing I have ever seen to The Genealogy of Morality by Nietzsche being put on the big screen. Let me try and explain. I think there are two reasons why it has that feel to it, two reasons why it is such a big divergence from its source material, Oil, a work about socialist collective action. The first is that There Will Be Blood is a hyper-individualistic film. It is a film about confrontations between individuals and the institutions of power, family, religion, money, not politics, the institutions of power which are seeking to control them, but through which they want to control other individuals. It is an individualistic film in which not just Daniel Plainview, but also his chief antagonists are extraordinarily powerful personalities trying to exercise power as an expression of their individuality, of their creativity, of their ability to impose themselves on a world which is brutal and cruel. The landscape of early 20th century Californian oil wildcatting is absolutely brutal. They are doing it as individuals. And the individualistic ethos of the film is there right from the beginning. So the very first sequence, which is quite long, is Daniel Day-Lewis, Daniel Plainview, looking for oil. And he's dug a kind of well, and he's climbing down it with his pickaxe, hoisting himself down, rubbing the soil, looking for the black gold, looking for signs of the black gold. He gets injured. Something lands on him. It looks like he's broken his leg at the bottom of this well. It might well be a death sentence, but by sheer force of will, he drags himself up and out because there's gold, there's oil down there. And he pulls himself out and he drags himself to the place where he can sign the deed. And he does this all on his own. There is no one else around. He is a completely solitary figure. This is just force of will. And when we see him subsequently, and we often see him in meetings trying to persuade people to sell him their land, he says he's a plain-speaking man, plain view by name, plain-speaking by nature. But one of the ways he makes his pitch in an environment, in a form of market competition where there are lots of people who, if they suspect there's oil on the land, are going to try and come and take it, including the big oil corporations who are his primary rivals here. When he makes his pitch to the local people, some of them pretty poor with little scrabbly land that they can't eke a living out of, he's offering them money. He says to them, people are going to come and try and buy your land off you, and they're going to come and they're going to tell you the way we're going to do it is we're going to bring in this person and that person. They're going to be contractors and drillers. They're going to franchise it out. They're going to depend on the railways. You are going to find yourself locked in a kind of mesh of obligations. He says, I am offering you myself. I do it all myself. I am the one you can trust because it is all through me. I'm not an institution. I'm not a company. I don't depend on the railroads. I do it all myself. I am my own man. He is that kind of person, but so is his chief antagonist in the film. And his chief antagonist is one of the sons of one of the older farmers from whom he wishes to purchase land. This son, who's played by Paul Dano, who incidentally played the alienated teenager in Little Miss Sunshine who was obsessed with Nietzsche. Paul Dano plays a young, when we first meet him, preacher called Eli Sunday. And he is, as much as Daniel Plainview, a self-made man. This is going to be a contest between two self-made men. There are aspects of Daniel Plainview's story that echo Citizen Kane. There is an arc to it, particularly how it ends, a wealthy man in a mansion leading a life completely hollowed out of meaning, broken by his success. But in Citizen Kane, Orson Welles was very clear he did not want to tell the story of a self-made man. He wanted to tell the story of a man who had been given money and power. And Citizen Kane is a film where politics, conventional politics, running for office, trying to control the government, is everywhere. This is not that story. Daniel Plainview has done it himself, for himself, by himself. So too has Eli Sunday, who has created a church, the Church of the Third Revelation. And that church is his vehicle of power. He is a preacher. He is not a strong man, so he is not physically strong. He looks pretty weedy in this setting where there are strong, violent, aggressive men prospecting for oil, competing with each other, leading very dangerous lives. There's always the risk of being killed in an accident. We see one of them killed in an accident. It's brutal and dirty work, and these men are wiry and strong, and you would not want to confront them in a fight. And Eli Sunday is going to lose any fist fight with any of these men. He is a wimp, except in his church. It's his church. He's not depending on any higher authority in this world. He doesn't take his authority to preach from anything other than the power of his oratory, from his charisma. And in his church, he is not weedy or weak. In his church, actually, when we see him, it's not just that he controls his congregation. It's not just that he speaks with extraordinary passion, charisma, but also violence. He is violent in his church. He's a healer. He heals the sick. He heals them by driving out the devil, and he grabs them, and he threatens them. And it looks at various moments like he's going to beat them up. And they have no power to resist him because it is his church, his word, his revelation. It all goes through him. It's an extraordinarily individualistic version of religion. And Daniel Plainview's is an extraordinarily individualistic version of capitalism. And each of them feels like that they are taking on the institutional forms of power that they want to channel through their own persons, their own bodies, their own personalities, their own wills. And the film is, in large part, but not exclusively, the story of the confrontation between these two men, Daniel Plainview and Eli Sunday. And the reason I say it's like watching The Genealogy of Morality by Nietzsche put up on the screen is because The Genealogy of Morality tells the story of modern civilization, modern human development, through a contest for power, essentially between the church and, let's call it money, but you could call it secular power, but the power of powerful individuals, also the power of powerful families. But The Genealogy of Morality is particularly interested in the ways in which weak people, physically weak people, people who would not normally be able to dominate, to use the Christian term, the meek, use the power of religion as their only weapon, their only means to dominate the strong, the physically strong, the economically strong, the intellectually strong. I mean, we are also talking about a world of ideas here. When I say there are these four institutions, I don't mean to say that ideas don't matter. This is a podcast about the history of ideas. Ideas do matter. Ideas can shape these institutions, but if these ideas are going to take hold, they also have to take hold in some form or another through one of these institutions. They don't just exist in a vacuum. And Nietzsche understood that the idea of equality, of salvation, of justice, that can take hold through the Christian church in all of its different forms, is an idea that works on behalf of and in the service of the weak. And Eli Sunday is the manifestation of that. He is a Nietzschean priest. He exercises power through Nietzschean priestcraft, which is to insist on a version of morality which tames and contains people who would otherwise have the power. And it does it by physically constraining them. And that's what we see in this film, in a series of extraordinary confrontations that mark the film. It runs from, in sequence, 1902 to 1927, but it's episodic. We just see moments in time in the story of Daniel Plainview. But in each of these moments, there is a confrontation with Eli Sunday and his church. In the first of these confrontations, it is Daniel Plainview, the physically strong, powerful prospector, who comes out on top. Eli Sunday goes to him when it's clear that he is going to start drilling for oil on family land, and says to him, as the local preacher, the man who represents the local church, I want to bless this project. So when we launch, when you have the opening of the drill and the rig, I want to bless it. I want to bless the workers. And I want you to introduce me. I want you to introduce me by name and tell people that I am here to offer the blessing. And it's clear from the very beginning that he is doing this as an expression of his ego. He is an extraordinarily egotistical figure in a world where he has no other outlet to dominate other human beings. He's too weak. He's a feeble guy. The only way he can do it is to be sanctioned as the one authority who can give religious sanction to these economic activities. And Daniel Plainview says, yes, sure, I will introduce you as the preacher man who is blessing our joint enterprise. And then he doesn't do it. He deliberately snubs him. And you see in both men's eyes a completely clear understanding that this is a power struggle. It is a power struggle between money, which is what Daniel Plainview represents, and faith or religion, which is what Eli Sunday represents. And in the first showdown, money wins. There is nothing that Eli Sunday can do. He has to swallow his pride, and we see him almost literally, physically, swallowing his pride. There is another confrontation in which his weakness is made even more explicit. There is a terrible accident at one of the rigs. Oil gushes out of the ground. Eventually, it explodes. There's a huge fire. The rig burns to the ground. In this accident, Daniel Plainview's son, his young son, H.W. Plainview, is very badly injured. And he's lying near the rig. He's blown by the explosion onto the ground. It damages his ears, his eardrums, and he emerges from this accident deaf. Daniel Plainview confronts Eli Sunday because Eli Sunday says that he is a healer. He heals the sick. He drives out the devil. And if you can drive out the devil, you will walk again. The lame will walk and the deaf will hear. And Daniel Plainview knows as plain as anything that this is all hokum. He doesn't believe a word of it. It's charlatanry. Eli Sunday is a complete sham. He is using his supposed healing power simply to exercise the only power that he has in his arsenal. And so Daniel Plainview confronts him. He doesn't just confront him. He beats the hell out of him. He grabs him. He pummels him into the earth. He rubs his face into the mud and he screams at him, "You call yourself a healer. You cannot heal my son." He brutalizes him. And it looks like he leaves him a wreck. But there is another scene coming in which it becomes clear that Eli Sunday is not simply to be overpowered by physical force, because there is one tract of land that Daniel Plainview needs to buy in order to escape the power of the big oil companies and of the big railroad companies, which, as he said, are owned by the oil companies. It's all a cartel. It's all a conspiracy. It's a conspiracy against the individualistic capitalist, the one who wants to do it by himself. The companies will eat you up unless you fight them hard, tooth and nail. What he needs is a pipeline to the sea so that he doesn't have to use the railroads to transport his oil. But there is a holdout, as there so often is in these stories, a farmer who has not and will not sell his land. And it is the land through which the pipeline has to run. If he goes round it, it's another 50 miles and it no longer is an economically viable prospect. He must buy this man's land. He goes to meet the old farmer in question. And the farmer says, "I will sell you my land, but on one condition: you join our church." And Daniel Day-Lewis, whose performance is completely mesmerizing, he doesn't often say much, but he communicates an awful lot. You see the agony that this causes him. It is the last thing that he wants to do. because to join that church is to join the church of Eli Sunday, the man whose face he's rubbed in the dirt, whom he has screamed at and exposed as a charlatan. He will have to go to that church and submit to whatever Eli Sunday requires of him in order that he can be saved, because the price of the land is public salvation. And we see it happen. It's a completely remarkable scene. These two men, who are now mortal antagonists, I would say, by this point, appear in the church in front of the congregation of the Church of the Third Revelation. Eli Sunday, Paul Dano, gets up, still looking as weedy as anything, and says, "Is there someone here? Do we have a newcomer here who has sinned and wants to confess his sins?" And Daniel Plainview looks horror-struck by what he's going to have to do. But he has to do it. He gets up and he says, "Yes, I am that sinner." And Eli Sunday humiliates him, forces him to confess his sins, but he also beats him. He slaps him around the face. He gives him back what he had been given in an earlier confrontation, because in the church, he has the power not just of moral force, but of physical force. Daniel Plainview, who in any other setting would beat this man to death, has to submit in front of people to being slapped around. And you know he'll never forgive him for that. You know he will never forgive him. You know that this cannot end well. He will not simply swallow this. But in this setting, he has to swallow it. And that scene did really remind me of Nietzsche and Nietzsche's argument about Christianity, which is that Christianity's manifestation of the will to power is the idea of turning the other cheek, which seems extraordinary. How could an expression of power be a mantra to let other people beat you? Turn the other cheek is the Christian version of the will to power. And the answer is that turn the other cheek is not an injunction for the weak. It is an injunction for the strong. It is the rule that tries to contain the power of people who will otherwise beat you. In this scene, what we see is Daniel Plainview literally, having been slapped on one side, forced to turn the other cheek so he can be slapped on the other side, because the power that Eli Sunday has is to require him to submit to Christian meekness. That is pure Nietzsche. But it is not the end of the story, because in the climax of the film, we get the climactic confrontation between Daniel Plainview and Eli Sunday. We're now in 1927. Daniel Plainview has made his fortune and more. He is living in a vast, empty, Citizen Kane-like palace, which is also a prison. He is a drunk. He is a physical wreck. He's been wrecked by his life of struggle and competition. He is a bitter and brutal man. He is beyond good and evil. He's a monster. And he meets for the last time with Eli Sunday in the bowling alley that he's constructed in this absurd mansion, where he is surrounded by empty whiskey bottles and food on the floor. He's living a filthy life in luxury. Again, not like Citizen Kane, who keeps up appearances. This man has given up keeping up appearances long ago. And Eli Sunday comes to meet with him. And Eli Sunday looks like the victor in this struggle. He is neatly dressed in his clerical garb. It looks like he's made it in the world of self-made preacherdom. Daniel Plainview is a mess of a man. But it becomes clear very quickly that Eli Sunday in this setting has no power because he needs money. He's done something. He doesn't say what. He's speculated with the church's money. The devil, as he said, got into his soul, and he is now desperate. He needs money, and the only person from whom he can get money is Daniel Plainview, because there is one outstanding tract of land which has oil under it. And the church controls that land now because the farmer has died, and the church has acquired the land in his will. And Eli Sunday wants to sell the land to Daniel Plainview for $100,000, and he's desperate. He is absolutely desperate. And his antagonist turns the whole thing on its head. He wreaks his revenge. You must just do one thing for me. You must stand up here and you must speak in this empty bowling alley as though you were in your church, and you must say out loud, loud and proud, I am a false prophet. I am a hypocrite. I am a liar. I am the false prophet. It was all a lie. And he forces him to do it in a kind of mirror of the scene where Eli Sunday slaps him around the face. He does it back to him, not with physical force, but he makes him say the thing that he said to him when he rubbed his face in the mud. You are false from top to bottom. And Eli Sunday is so desperate that he does it. Daniel Plainview wreaks his revenge, and then he wreaks his revenge again by saying, there is no oil in that land. I have already bled that land dry. I sucked the oil out. I didn't own the land, but I owned all the land around it. You don't understand how oil works. I simply dug underneath it and I sucked it out. And in the famous line, in the climax of the film, he says to Eli Sunday, it's like you had a milkshake and I had a milkshake, but I had a really long straw and I drank your milkshake. He says, he screams. And then he beats Eli Sunday to death with a bowling pin. And the film ends with him sitting in a pool of blood. There will indeed be blood, having finally beaten this man to death. But it's not a victory for money over religion. It's not a victory for Daniel Plainview's version of the will to power over Eli Sunday's version, because it is clear both men have been completely destroyed by this contest, by this fight. Daniel Plainview is not the victor. He is simply the wreaker of havoc, a kind of havoc in which everyone is destroyed. So this film is in part a Nietzschean tale of the confrontation between the will to power expressed through money and the will to power expressed through religion, as though there were no other politics. And yet that is not the whole story, because there is something else going on here. The third institutional force that is at work and wreaks its havoc on both men is family. This is also a film about the power of family. And actually, in the case of Daniel Plainview, he does use money to exert his power over religion and indeed to exert his power over the collective corporate forms of money. He does succeed at a huge cost, but he does succeed as an individual in besting the oil companies. He beats Standard Oil. He does not in the end submit to the Church of the Third Revelation. He makes the founder of that church submit to him, and then he beats him to death. His weakness, the institution that he cannot master, he cannot tame, he cannot control, is family. And it is family, in the end, that destroys him. So through the film, alongside the story of the confrontation between the Nietzschean priest and the Nietzschean man of power, of secular power, there is also the story of Daniel Plainview's family, and it plays out in two relationships: a relationship with his son, or the person who seems to be his son, and a relationship with his brother, the person who seems to be his brother. His son, whom we first see as a baby, and then we see as a young boy of maybe 9 or 10, is H.W. Plainview, a sweet boy, and he is also part of the business. So in his pitch to people from whom he wishes to acquire, effectively steal land, Daniel Plainview doesn't just say, I'm my own person. He says, you can trust me because we are nothing but a family business. And the family is just me and my boy, H.W., a sweet-faced boy, an innocent-looking boy, quite clearly a prop. He is a symbol of Plainview's bona fides. If you don't trust me, look at the boy. Do you really mistrust a 10-year-old boy with a sweet face like this? He uses the boy. The boy is an extension of his will to power, his desire to dominate, to get what he wants, to win the competition. His son is a vehicle for that. But it's also clear that his son is more than that. He loves his son. We see him, the only person we do see him being affectionate with is his son. And when his son is injured in this accident and becomes deaf, it more or less breaks Daniel Plainview. He can't deal with it. He partly can't deal with it because he has lost his prop. But more than that, he can't deal with it because it's clear he sees his son as an extension of himself, and that is both a cruel and instrumental relationship, and in his case, a manifestation of love. The only person in the world Daniel Plainview loves is himself, but he loves his son if his son is an extension of himself. When his son is broken, when his son is deaf, he cannot love him, and he sends him away. He sends him away to a school for deaf boys, and it's a cruel act, but it's not simply an act of violence or malice. There is no question a kind of love underneath it. We meet the son again right at the end of the film, and before the climactic scene in which Daniel Plainview confronts and then kills Eli Sunday, he has another kind of confrontation with his son. His son is now a grown man. He is still deaf. He can only communicate with his father through someone who signs for him. So there is a translator in the room, but they have their final confrontation in which HW, the son, says to his father, I love you, but I cannot live like this anymore. He's clearly working in the family oil business. He says, I'm going to go to Mexico. I'm going to set up my own business. I'm going to be my own man. I am breaking with you. I no longer want to be your heir and successor. And Daniel Plainview will not accept this. And he says to him, if you go into competition with me, you are nothing to me. You are either an extension of me or you are nothing. And when he realizes that his son won't back down, he then tells him what he claims is the truth. I don't think it is the truth. I think this boy probably is his son, but it doesn't really matter at this point. It doesn't matter who's lying. It is just a confrontation of wills. And Daniel Plainview says to his son, you were never my son. You're a bastard. You're an orphan. I found you. I found you in a basket. I used you as a prop. I needed a prop. There was no mother. He used to tell people that the mother died in childbirth. Maybe this is true. Maybe it's not true. It doesn't matter. He loved the boy. He still loves the boy. But the boy's act of willful rebellion breaks him. It is the intolerable thing for a man who is nothing but the will to power, including in relation to his family. He cannot allow this boy to break that tie of family. But if it was purely instrumental, he could probably live with it. There is clearly something else going on here. We don't know what Daniel Plainview's family background is. We get hints of it. A father who may have abandoned him and had another family. We don't know. He is the solitary, monstrous person he is because there is some hole where family love should be. But nonetheless, it is the grip of family and the breaking of that grip that breaks him. He goes straight from the break with his son to the bludgeoning to death of the preacher. He can kill the preacher. He cannot kill his own son. And we see a version of this earlier on in the film in his relationship with his brother. He meets a man about halfway through who claims to be his half-brother. He was unaware of the existence of this man. He shows up and says, I've heard, Daniel, my brother, that you have made your fortune in oil. And I am here to let you know that you have a brother by a different mother. We share a father. And I'm here to be at your service. I will work with you. I will do whatever you ask of me. I've had a tough life, he says. I have not made my fortune. I tried in oil, but I wasn't tough enough. You are the master here. Not just that you are my older brother. You are my master. And as your brother, I will serve you. And Daniel Plainview is deeply suspicious of this man. He's never heard of this man. He doesn't know if he really is his brother. But there is a need in him to have exactly that kind of brother, to have a family relationship, which is also a relationship of master-slave. The brother will do what he wants. And you see, again, he doesn't say it explicitly, but it's written in his face, a kind of hunger for the man to be genuine. He accepts proof through a letter, through a diary, that he is who he says he is. And he starts entrusting him with the business. The brother comes along with him to the crucial meetings, including the meetings with Standard Oil. One meeting with Standard Oil in which the man from Standard Oil offers Daniel Plainview $1 million for his business. And this is $1 million in the early 20th century. I don't know what it is now. Let's say it's $100 million now. He offers him his fortune. There are only 4 people at the meeting. The 2 men from the big oil company, Daniel and his brother. And Daniel turns them down. And Daniel says to the man from Standard Oil, what need have I of $1 million? What would I do with $1 million? By implication, I am all about the competition. I'm not about winning and sitting on my laurels. I am about besting other human beings. $1 million is nothing to me. I can't do anything with that. I can take people's land from them, extract oil from it, wrestle with the land, wrestle with the soil, wrestle with the people, and win. And the oil man says, well, you could get your son back. I know that your son, you sent him away to the deaf school because you are too consumed with business. Well, if I gave you $1 million for your business, you can get your son back. And Daniel Plainview says to the man from Standard Oil, never, ever tell me what to do with my family. It's though he's crossed the one red line beyond which there is no coming back. You can preach at me, you can moralize at me, you can lie to me, you can try and swindle me. Never, ever tell me what to do about my family. And then he says to him, one day I will find you and your family, and I will slit your throat. Some line has been crossed. The point of weakness in this man has been found. And that expression, I will come and cut your throat, is an expression of his weakness. He doesn't normally make those threats. He might do it, but he doesn't say it. He says it because his weakness has been exposed. His weakness is family. And we discover it again when he realizes, long after he has brought this so-called brother into the family business, that the man is a fraud. He isn't his brother. He was lying to him, and he confronts him and he says, tell me who you really are. And the man says, okay, I will tell you who I am. You did have a brother, and I met your brother. Your brother was sick. He was not a successful man, but he had a diary. And in his diary, I read about his life and read about your life, including your early life. Your brother died of tuberculosis. And I took possession of the diary and of some of the letters. And I resolved to come out and find you. He was going to come and find you. He was going to do what I have done. But in the end, he was too weak. He didn't have the strength. And the illness took him. So I came and did what he was going to do. I introduced myself as your long-lost half-brother, and I am still here to serve you. Nothing has changed. I am your servant. I have done nothing to cross you or to confront you. I have done what you've asked of me. And it's quite clear that Daniel Plainview has come to depend on this weak man to be someone through whom his will can be channeled uninterrupted, unchallenged. And the man more or less says to him, does it matter that I'm not actually your brother? Because I can still play this role. And he says to him, in his fatal final words, I can be your friend. And Daniel Plainview kills him, shoots him in the head, and buries him in the dirt, because the line has been crossed again. Nobody tells Daniel Plainview what to do about family. He is a terrifying man, and the performance by Daniel Day-Lewis is completely terrifying. There is a feeling that he is always one step away from violence, and at the same time, he completely captures the ways in which this man's power is not violence. It is not that he gets his will by beating people up. He gets his will through money. Money is the vehicle of his power. In the end, he has to persuade people to sell. The reason he does the one act, which is for him the most terrible thing he can do, it is far worse than shooting to death his supposed brother. It is far worse than beating to death Eli Sunday with a bowling pin. The worst thing that he does in his own mind is get up in front of that church and confess his sins and allow another man to slap him and not slap that man back. But he does it because the only way ultimately he can get his way is to persuade people to sell stuff. So he is a version, in the spirit of the original book, Oil, he is a version of the force of capitalism, but it is the purely individualistic version. It is not the corporate version. Standard Oil's weakness is not family. Standard Oil is a corporation. Within it, there are extremely powerful families, or there were. But nonetheless, at the heart of the corporation is a kind of pure money power. And the people that he confronts work for the corporation. Daniel Plainview is only himself. He works only for himself. People who work for him do not work for a business. They work for him. His control is expressed through his personal will, and he cannot bear it when another man masters him. The thing that Eli Sunday requires him to say in that church service where he confesses his sins is that he sent his son away and he betrayed his own son. Eli Sunday knows what his weakness is, and he forces him as an expression of his power to say the one thing that Daniel Plainview will never allow any other man to force him to say, which is he is a bad father and a bad family man. And again, he wreaks his revenge at the end, because the final thing he says to Eli Sunday before he beats him to death is that he was always the weak brother. There is another brother, an identical brother, played by the same actor, whom we meet at the start of the film, who comes to Daniel Plainview, Paul Sunday, and says, I think there's oil on my family's land. And if you give me cash, $10,000 in cash, I will lead you to where the oil is. We never see that boy again. In the novel Oil, he is one of the central characters. He doesn't feature in this film. He is just the alter ego that we see at the beginning, but he is referenced at the end. Daniel Plainview says to Paul Sunday's brother, Eli Sunday, the broken, hypocritical preacher, it was your brother that I dealt with. It was your brother who sold you out. I gave him money and took your family's land. You were always the weakling. You were always the inadequate one. You were the weak link in that family. And then he kills him. In the end, this contest between the different kinds of power through which individuals can try and manifest their personal power feels almost nihilistic. Nietzsche was not a nihilist. Nietzsche believed ultimately in the possibility of human creativity, of individual human power to transcend these institutional traps. He thought in the late 19th century he was living in a world of civilized society in which these kinds of institutional traps had constrained and limited the power of human beings to be truly themselves, to be truly creative beings. And it was emancipation from these institutional traps that would lead to a kind of fulfillment or liberation. Human beings had to rise above the institutions that to that point were constraining them by forcing them to pay service to institutional power. You had to get beyond Christianity, beyond good and evil, beyond capitalism and the rules of capitalism, including the rule of law, beyond democracy, beyond political power. Individuals had to start using these instruments of power rather than being used by them. And I think what we see in There Will Be Blood, one of the many reasons why I think it is an unbelievably powerful original film, is a version of that story, but one that doesn't cash out in the way that Nietzsche would like. The two primary antagonists do use one of these institutions. In the case of Daniel Plainview, it is money power. In the case of Eli Sunday, it is religious power, preaching power. They do use these institutions rather than allow themselves to be used by them. They are the masters of that form of power, and they confront each other. And in that confrontation, each of them reveals the extent of the power that can be mastered in that way. Even the physically strong can be mastered by the weak if you can just drag them into church. If you do not drag them into church, the physically strong will beat the hell out of you. But they cannot master the power of family. In the end, the power of family destroys them. It gets them and it destroys them. It could be the other way around. It could be that Daniel Plainview masters the power of family, but he wouldn't then have mastered the power of money, because money in the end would have had to be his master. One of these institutions is going to get you. In the original novel by Upton Sinclair, the hope is that the power of the state can be the vehicle of human liberation. In this Nietzschean version, that possibility is not even considered. It's not countenanced. It's not on the horizon. This is a story of individuals and their confrontations. But in that confrontation, what we discover is that there is no final emancipation. Maybe you can master one of these institutions. Maybe you can use one of these institutions to master another of these institutions. Maybe you can manifest your will to power in a way that means, as in the case of Daniel Plainview, by the end, no one can control you. No one can tell you what to do. You are a godless monster, but you are not the Übermensch. You are not the man who has come to show what is possible for human beings. You too are a wretch and a wreck, because there is always one of these institutions that will get you. And that's why it feels like a nihilist story. Here are these human beings trying to create their own values, to create their own expressions of power. But in the end, they are completely at the mercy of forms of human expression, including ultimately love and pity and compassion. Daniel Plainview is broken by the fact that deep down, you can see it even at the end when he's a murderous monster, even at the end, he has a kind of compassion for his son, the son that he denies, that he rejects, that he says is not his son. You can see it breaking him. In the end, these human beings cannot be the creators of their own values. In the end, we live in a world in which one of, or more than one of, family, religion, money, or the state will get you. This is, as you have probably noticed, our first episode of 2025. I wanted to wish everybody a very happy new year. We've got 3 more films to talk about in this series before we launch our next big series, our big series for 2025, which is going to be a history of revolutionary ideas across politics, religion, art and science, from the ancient world to the modern world, lots and lots of different ideas to talk about. But before we get there, a few more films. And next week, it's a film by a director that I've talked about already, indeed, just last time, with Helen Lewis. The only director who features twice in this series is David Fincher, because I also want to talk about his brilliant film on Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook, and the corrupting power of money, The Social Network. Do join us for that. This has been Past, Present, Future, brought to you in partnership with the London Review of Books. Past, Present, Future is part of the Airwave podcast network.